So hopefully now we have a reasonably solid understanding of what an array is. So it might be a good opportunity at this point to go back and have a look at strings again and see if we can't understand what a string is a little bit better now that we know what the fundamental structure of a string is, in other words, an array. Okay, let's go and build a bit of source code surrounding strings. I've called this file string.c, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the user to input a string, and then I'm going to do what string did. In other words, I'm going to count the number of characters in the string. Only this time I'm not going to use string, I'm going to write the code myself. Let's see how that looks. Firstly, we need the string itself. So we need an array of characters. We'll call it name, and we'll give it a length of, say, 50. How about 51? For the null character, don't forget. So we'll do a printf. Please enter your name and a scanf of a %s, and that'll be name. Don't need the ampersand because it's a string. And now we're going to write some code, but before we write it, well, let's look at what we're trying to get to. The length of %s is %b. So that'll be the length of the string, so that'll be name. So I might want to put little quotes there just to make it sort of obvious. That's what we're talking about. The length of that is, and then we need an integer variable here, so we'll call it length. So that's what we're trying to achieve. Might as well go and declare that variable now while I think of it. So we're trying to determine the length of a string without using the string function. Let's see if we can do that. So when we think about it, what do we have to achieve? We have to write a little piece of code that walks along the string. In other words, it walks along the array, looking at each element until what? When should it stop? Well, I guess it should stop when it sees a null character. Sounds reasonable. So let's see if we can write that. For, it's obviously a for loop. Well, what should we do here? Let's say I, loop index equals 0. I is less than 51. Remember, that's a pretty standard construct in a for loop when you're talking about arrays. I equals I plus 1. And we'll say that if the character that we're looking at, if the ith character in the array is a null, so how do we do that? We say name brackets I equals, double equals, because it's a comparison, not an assignment. What's the null character? How do we write the null character? Can you remember? It's a bit of a while ago now. Yep, it's quote \0 quote. You could just type in the 0, but I prefer to do it this way because you're really clear that we're talking about a character. Then what do we do? If the name is a null character, if that ith element is a null character, what do we do? Well, we stop. Well, we're done. So we can do this. We can say, well, length. We know what the length is now. It's I, isn't it? And then we break. Can you see that? You see what we're doing? Okay, let's see if that works. Okay, and run. Oh, hang on. There were some errors there. I is undeclared. Of course, I is undeclared. Silly me. Let's try that again. Okay, no errors. And run. Please enter your name. Length of mark is 4. Okay, so it is working, but it seems to me that the code here is a little bit complex for doing something that is really a very, very simple task. Now you might look at that and go, looks pretty simple to me. How else could you strip that down? Well, if you watch, I'll show you. This is not really an exercise in arrays or strings or loops. This is an exercise in efficient coding. First of all, I'm going to get rid of the I variable because it's simply not needed. I can do all of this without the I variable at all. Okay, it's completely gone. Let's now get rid of these brackets because I don't need those anymore because there's only one statement that I'm performing. I don't need brackets when I have only one statement. Okay, so let's check if that works. And run, please enter your name, how about Tom this time, length of Tom is 3. Okay, so that's working too, but I still think it's not quite enough. I still think it could get more efficient. And to make it more efficient, I'm going to look at this condition. This is the condition upon which the loop will terminate. But if you think about it, this is also a condition upon which the loop will terminate. And this will always happen before this. We'll always reach the null terminating character before we reach the end of the array. Well, that's assuming that the user did not enter more than 50 characters on the keyboard. And I think that's a fair assumption. Well, at least it's a fair assumption for this particular academic exercise. In true commercial coding, you wouldn't make that assumption. Users can enter the most unusual things. They will never enter what you think they're going to enter. Anyway, so to summarize, that will always happen before that. So that bit, the highlighted bit there, is completely unnecessary. I can get rid of it. And I can substitute this for it. So I'll cut that from there, and I'll paste it there. And this if statement is now not needed. And what about that break? That looks like that's the only thing that I'm doing every time through the loop. Interesting. I don't want to break every time through the loop. That's ridiculous. I only want to break when this condition is true. So the break is superfluous now. So I can get rid of it. But what do I put there instead? Because I really don't need to do anything. I don't need to do anything at all in this loop. All I need to do is walk along the loop until such time as it's time to stop. This is when it's time to stop. And when I stop, the variable called length will magically be set to the value that I need. So in other words, everything that the loop needs to do is doing in here. I guess if you like, this is really the guts of the loop right here. We're adding length to 1 each time we walk along the array. So this is completely unnecessary. However, I can't just remove it. I can't just say, I don't want to do anything. Because what it will do then is it will treat this line as if this was the line that was going to be executed every time through the loop. Okay, so I certainly can't remove it entirely. What I really need to do is I need to have a statement that does nothing at all. One way to achieve that is to do this. That is legitimate, to have two curly brackets with nothing in between them. Okay, that is one way of doing it. And there's another way of doing it, and that is this. That's a bit odd. It's just a semicolon by itself. An empty statement. A statement that does nothing. It's obviously also, if you think about it, with no white space issues, you could even do that. But I think that's really, really ugly, because it looks like that's a mistake. That semicolon on the end there looks like it's been put there accidentally, when it quite clearly has not. So I'll do it like this. Now, because that's such an unusual thing to do, I usually put a comment there saying do nothing, or if you like, a do nothing lop, do nothing loop. This is a do nothing loop. And do nothing loops are legitimate loops. They occasionally happen from time to time, especially in a situation like this, where all you're trying to achieve is find out the length of something. So we've got a for loop now that does nothing at all. Now, when you think about back to the code that we had before, this is much simpler code. I know that you thought the code couldn't get any simpler than it was, but this, you'd have to agree, is simpler. The question is, does it work? Let's try and find out. Certainly no errors. Okay, so if you didn't believe that you could have just a semicolon by itself and would have it compile with no errors, I think you'd have to believe it now. And run the project. Please enter your name, Mark, and we have erroneous behavior. Let's try and figure out why we have erroneous behavior. A little bit of debugging going on here. Can you see it? It has to do with this condition here. This is the condition under which the loop should continue. However, when we cut and paste it from the if statement that it came out of, that was the time at which we should break. But now we've stuck it in a place where the loop should continue. So we actually just simply want to reverse it. We want to say we're going to continue through the loop while the character at that position is not the null character, not while it is null character. So that should improve things. Let's try that again. No errors. Run. Mark. Length of mark is 4. Okay, so that's a little successful piece of debugging. That's the sort of thing that happens all the time in C programming. Let's move on and look at a more complex and sophisticated type of an array, the multi-dimensional